Hola estudiantes! Today we're going to take a look at regular AR verbs. So the first thing that you have to do when it comes to verbs is you have to memorize what they mean. And I'm going to say again, with Spanish 1, you really want to stay inside the box of what you're learning in class. So for us, we have these 5 verbs that are regular AR verbs, and that's what we want to stick with for now, all right? So let's take a second and just talk about what these different verbs mean. So estudiar is to study. Hablar is to speak. Sometimes you might translate that as to talk. Llevar is to wear. Means a couple of other things, but we're going to stick with that for now. Necesitar, it looks like necessary. It means to need. Terminar looks like terminate. That is to finish or to end. So you've got to start there. You can do grammar all day long, but until you know what some verbs mean, you're not going to be able to communicate. So that's where we start. Definitely work on memorizing those words. You can go to Quizlet, you can make flashcards, tons of things you can do to get those memorized. So let's talk for a second. These words are infinitives. And we've discussed this before. Infinitives are the most basic form of a verb. So it's just to study, to speak. We don't know who is speaking. We don't know when the speaking is taking place. It's just to do those things. And when I give a quiz, I'm pretty picky about that. It has to say to in front of it. Because if it's study, that might be a command. Hey, you, study this tonight. And that is not an infinitive. So it's got to have that word to in front of it in order for it to be an infinitive. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is how infinitives can be helpful. So infinitives are useful sometimes. If you think about sentences, you don't say, I to study right now because I have a test coming up. You say, I am studying right now. But if you can think of a sentence using an infinitive, then you'll see that they are useful. We might say, I have to study right now. I need to study right now. I ought to study. We also can say, I like to study, or maybe I don't like to study. So we're going to talk about likes and dislikes really quickly. If I want to say I like to do something, I'm going to say me gusta. And then I'm going to follow that up with an infinitive. So if I want to say I like to speak Spanish, I'll say me gusta. And then I'm saying I like to speak, so I will use that infinitive hablar. And then español. I like to speak Spanish. Now if you wanted to say I don't like something, all we do is put no in front of that verb phrase. So no me gusta would be I don't like. And we follow that up with an infinitive. So if we want to say I don't like to study, we'll say no me gusta. And I don't like to study, so we will say estudiar. So those phrases, me gusta and no me gusta, are very useful. So that is how infinitives can be helpful. But you do sometimes need to be able to conjugate a verb. So conjugate, that is a big word you will hear a lot when learning a language. So that is when we change a verb to say who is doing the action or when the action is taking place. So if, for example, in English, we don't say I to be, we don't say you to be, we don't say he to be. We say I am. You are. He is. So to be was our infinitive. Am is an are our conjugations. So we could say I like to be happy, and then I would be using an infinitive. Or we could say I am happy, and that would be using a conjugation. So it all just depends on what you're trying to say. So that's verbs in English. So typically with a regular verb, you will have a couple of infinitives in the present tense. So let's go with to study. So with study, we have two possible conjugations in the present tense, study and studies. So we'll say I study, you study, we study, they study, you all study. But we would say he studies, she studies, it studies. So for he, she, and it, we typically add an S. Sometimes we have to change the spelling a bit. And then I, you, we, they, and you all, we typically just take off the to come up with that basic conjugation. So let's look at Spanish. So the first thing here, we've memorized our verbs. The next step is making sure that you have memorized your pronouns. So that is crazy important. Let's go over that really quickly. So yo is I, tú is you, and that's informal. Usted is you, and that's formal. Él is he, ella is she, nosotros or nosotras is we, vosotros and vosotras is you all, and that's that informal in Spain. Ustedes is you all. Ellos is they, ellas is they, and we know ellos is masculine, ellas is feminine. So that's the first thing we've got to know what our pronouns mean. Without that, you really are not going to be able to work with this. So pause for a second if you need to. Memorize those verbs, memorize those pronouns, make those kind of your plan. And then the third step here is going to be memorizing some new verb endings. So for yo, we're going to memorize O. We're going to memorize tú goes with as. Usted, él, and ella go with a. Nosotros goes with amos. Vosotros goes with ais. Ustedes, ellos, and ellas go with on. So what we do with a verb, let's say we have the verb hablar. So again, first thing we need to know is that means to speak. So what we do is we take off the AR and we add those 6 verb endings from the top there. So for yo, take off that AR and we're going to add O. And hablo would mean I speak. For tú, take off the AR. Next to tú it says as. Hablas is you speak. The third conjugation, take off that AR. Usted, él, and ella go with a. So habla actually can mean a few different things. It can mean you speak. It can mean he speaks. It can mean she speaks. It also can mean it. It speaks. And that's because we don't have a subject pronoun for it. So it goes with the he and she conjugation. For nosotros, take off that AR. Next to nosotros, it says amos. So add that in there. Hablamos would mean we speak. For vosotros, add in ais. Habláis would mean you all speak. And then that last one, take off that AR, add in on. And hablan can mean you all speak or they speak. So let's take a look at these 3 sentences that we have here and try to translate those into Spanish. So we speak Spanish. So let's break it down into 3 parts here. We have to know what our pronouns are. So we is nosotros. And then next to nosotros, it says amos. So again, we take off that AR in hablar because hablar means to speak. Add amos back in there. Hablamos is we speak. And then Spanish is español. Nosotros hablamos español. Now, another interesting thing in Spanish, we don't actually have to say nosotros because amos will only ever go with nosotros. You would never say yo hablamos or tú hablamos. That doesn't make sense. That would be like saying you am or he am. Am only goes with I. So we don't say you am, we am. We say I am. Same thing with hablamos. We only ever say hablamos with nosotros. All right, let's look at this next one. I speak Spanish. So we need to know that I in Spanish is yo. Next to yo, there's an O there. Take off that AR. Hablo. And then Spanish, español. And then this third sentence, Cindy speaks Spanish. This one's a little trickier. So Cindy speaks. So our verb is hablar. We take off the AR. So at this point, and this is why pronouns are so important, we've got to think, okay, instead of Cindy, what could I say? Instead of Cindy speaks Spanish, what pronoun could take the place of her name? It would be she. She speaks Spanish. So I've got to think in my mind, okay, she. And then I need to know that she is ella. So the ending that goes with ella is a, habla. So that's how we say Cindy speaks. So Cindy habla español. All right, let's talk about how these can actually translate. So if we have the word hablo, that actually can be a sentence. You see, I have a period at the end. So the beginning of that, H-A-B-L, we know that that's telling us that somebody speaks. That O tells us that we're talking about yo, and we are in the present tense. So that's really what it tells us. So any way that that would translate is right. So speaking, yo, which is I, and in the present tense. So there are a few ways that we'll go over here. Hablo, basically, it could be I speak. And that can be a sentence, I speak. It can translate as I am speaking. It can translate as I do speak. So we could say, do you speak Spanish? Yes, I do speak Spanish. So it can translate any of those ways. So in English, we really like our helping verbs, like what we have there. In Spanish, we don't use helping verbs nearly as often. It also can translate as a question. If we put question marks around it and say hablo, it could mean, do I speak? Or it could mean, am I speaking? So if you notice, every one of those is talking about me. They all have the word I in there, and they're all speaking, and they're all the present tense, and it can just translate a few different ways. So let's take a look at a few more sentences using the same concept. So the first sentence, Hernan is wearing green shoes. So Hernan is our subject. Is wearing. So this is like the am speaking version here. So he is wearing. So we need to know what to wear is. So to wear is llevar. Now we've got to say, okay, instead of Hernan, what could I say? Instead of Hernan is wearing, I could say he is wearing. So we take off our AR in llevar. And then we've got to look back at our verb endings. He, right there, goes with a. So we're going to add an a there. Hernan lleva, he is wearing. Now green shoes, I gave you a tricky one. This is based on that whole adjective thing. So remember, adjectives go after your noun. So we're going to flip-flop those. Shoes are zapatos. And then green is verde. But we need for it to agree with zapatos. So it ends in an E. Zapatos is masculine. Verde ending in an E, that can actually be masculine or feminine. But zapatos is plural, so we need for green to be plural. So verde ends in a vowel, so we add an S. And we're going to put zapatos first and then verde. So lleva zapatos verdes. Hernan lleva zapatos verdes. Perfect. All right, this next one, do you study math? Now look again, do I speak? That's all just translated into one word, hablo. So same thing here, do you study? That's all going to be taken care of in one word. So we need to figure out what study is. So to study is estudiar. So we know we take off the AR. And that leaves us with our stem. Now it's saying, do you study? And we're going to go with informal you for this one. So we'll go with to. And then next to to, it has os. So estudias. Now with questions, if you want to have the subject in there, we talked about how you don't have to have it in there, so you actually don't need that to. But typically if it's a question, you will put the subject after the verb. So estudias tú, and then math, matemáticas. Say it like a question. Estudias tú matemáticas? So you kind of go up with your voice at the end. All right, last one. Are you speaking English? So same thing. Are you? This is like the am I speaking? Are you speaking? So that's going to again be one word. So hablar is to speak. So we know we take off the AR. And again, this is you. Now, just for the sake of practice, we did to you for that second one. Let's go with the formal usted on this one, just to get that practice in. So are you speaking? And we're speaking formally, usted, right there, and it goes with a. So we're going to add an a in there, habla. Now, with a and an, because there are 3 different or sometimes 4 different possibilities for who our subject is, you are more likely to go ahead and say the pronoun with that one. With estudias, I would typically leave that out because it's very clear. It ends in as, so we know it goes with to. With a, we're not quite sure. Now, I think based on the context, it would probably be obvious in this one, but just in case. So we'll go ahead and put our usted in there. Habla usted, and then English. Inglés. Put question marks around it. Again, with your voice. Habla usted inglés? So you go up with that voice. So that's what it comes down to. I'm going to tell you again, you've got 3 steps here. The first step, memorize what those verbs mean. The second step is know what your pronouns are. And then the third step is to memorize those verb endings. And there are some websites you can go to practice this. I like to recommend spellion.com. It just gives you a little bit of rote practice. You can pick specific verbs. And again, stay inside the box. I would go with the 5 that we're learning right now because not every verb is regular. So spellion.com, you can click on present tense and then choose the 5 verbs from this chapter that we're working on right now. And it'll just give you a little bit of practice. If you would just spend a couple of minutes here and there, double checking, making sure you still remember the stuff, it's a good thing to do, especially right before a quiz.